Usually when you are handed a medical diagnosis, there is this fundamental expectation of like precision.
Oh, absolutely. Like you want a clear answer.
Right. You break an arm, you get an x-ray, and the doctor points to that stark, jagged white line on the black film and just says, there it is. It's broken. We really crave that binary clarity.
Yeah, we want the black and white.
But the moment you step into something complex, like neurodevelopment or chronic autoimmune issues, that X-ray machine is essentially useless. You are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just entirely murky.
You completely lose the comfort of easy categorization. The lines blur, the symptoms overlap, and suddenly you are forced to look at the entire system, the whole patient, rather than just a single isolated fracture.
Exactly. And I bring that up because, well, welcome to the Common Room. We are broadcasting to you from our little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas.
A place where old books present problems, faith, culture, and ordinary life all meet around a shared table.
Yeah, and you listening right now, you have a seat right here with us. The reason I bring up that murky diagnostic landscape is because we are dealing with a very similar kind of systemic complexity today regarding how we live, how we work, and how we actually sustain our families.
It's the difference between treating a symptom and understanding an entire ecology, really.
Right. And if you joined us for part one of this deep dive into the Catholic land movement, you'll remember we spent a lot of time in the philosophical stratosphere.
We were way up in the clouds.
We were. We explored the overarching theory. We looked at whether returning to the land was just some nostalgic retreat from the modern world, or if it was a radical attempt to renew it. We established the what and the why on a macro level. But today...
Today we get practical.
Okay, let's unpack this. What would it mean to actually do this now?
That is the essential pivot. We have to bring it down to earth.
Yeah, we are not here to romanticize the past. We aren't advocating for everyone to go play dress up in the 19th century and churn their own butter by candlelight.
I mean, unless you want to, but it's not the goal.
Right, it's not the requirement. We are asking a very hard, intensely practical question for the 21st century. Can widespread ownership of land and productive property actually make families and communities less fragile in an increasingly uncertain world?
Less fragile.
But I want to emphasize that phrase for you listening. Less fragile. Not perfectly isolated, not a prepper bunker, just less fragile.
And to really anchor this entire discussion, we need to introduce a specific term from our sources today. It's the hybrid household economy.
The hybrid household economy.
Because I think when most people hear the phrase return to the land, their immediate mental image is, a family packing all their worldly possessions into a U-Haul.
Buying 100 remote acres in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly, and attempting to achieve absolute, total self-sufficiency. They picture a family trying to grow all their own wheat, forge their own tools, and just sever every single tie with the modern economy.
Which, frankly, usually ends in burnout, bankruptcy, or both within about 3 years.
Precisely, because it is an impossible standard today. The hybrid household economy, which is heavily discussed in the contemporary Catholic land movement literature we are looking at, it isn't about isolation.
What is it about, then?
It is about strategic integration. It's about combining land, localized food production, professional or trade income, and local exchange.
So it's a mix.
Yeah, the goal is to lower your dependence on distant, highly fragile supply chains without necessarily abandoning your modern profession or your mortgage. It's an economy where the farm and Main Street are part of the exact same vision.
Let's ground this immediately in the data because I feel like we have to dispel this myth of the 100-acre full-time farmer as the only valid or even the most common expression of this movement.
We definitely do.
Let's look at the concrete reality of modern agricultural economics. You brought the 2024 USDA farm household income estimates into the studio today, and I spent all morning looking at these spreadsheets, and they are wild.
The numbers tell a story that completely contradicts the romantic myth we have.
They really do.
When you look at the median income strictly from farming activities for all farm households in the United States, that number is actually negative.
Wait, negative?
Yes. The median farm income is negative $1,830.
I need to pause on that because I think a lot of people assume farmers are either wealthy landowners or they are making a steady, if modest, living entirely from their crops.
That's the assumption, yeah.
But you are saying the median farm is literally losing money on the agricultural operation itself.
Yes. Between the massive capital costs of equipment, fluctuating commodity pricing, fertilizer, seed, insurance,
It all adds up.
the actual act of farming operates at a loss for the median household.
Mm.
However, if you look at the other column in that exact same USDA data set, you see something fascinating.
What's that?
The median off-farm income for those very same households was $86,900.
Oh, wow. So the off-farm income is completely subsidizing the agricultural deficit.
Exactly. It brings their total median household income to around $102,000. That is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
The USDA actually breaks these farms down into a specific typology to explain this. You have commercial family farms, right? Those generating over $350,000 in gross cash income.
And they actually do rely on the farm.
They absolutely do rely on the farm for their primary livelihood. But then you have this massive category they call residence farms.
Residence farms.
These make up a huge portion of the American agricultural landscape. For these households, farming is explicitly not their primary occupation.
So it's something they do on the side.
Right. In 2024, only 35% of these residence farms had a positive farm income. And even for that successful minority, the farming profits only accounted for about 8% of their total household wealth.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If the farm is losing money for the vast majority of these folks, and it requires an exhausting amount of physical labor before and after their actual paying jobs, why do it?
That's the logical question.
Right. From a purely economic, rational actor standpoint, they are running incredibly expensive, exhausting hobbies. Why not just buy cheaper food at the grocery store and use those off-farm hours to relax?
Well, if you judge the enterprise strictly by the metric of industrial profit margins and capital efficiency, you are right. It looks completely irrational.
This is crazy.
But that framework completely misses the point of why these families are doing this. They are not trying to compete with industrial agribusiness on the commodity price of soybeans.
It is like looking at a home kitchen and declaring it a failed restaurant because it doesn't turn a quarterly profit.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
I mean, if I do an audit of my own kitchen, I buy expensive ingredients, I spend an hour prepping, cooking, and cleaning, and at the end of the night, no one pays me. I lost money and time.
By the spreadsheet's logic, you should shut the kitchen down.
Exactly. But the point of my kitchen isn't to generate a profit margin. The point is sustenance. It is the material foundation of my family's biological and social life.
That is the exact analogy. The goal of the hybrid household economy is resilience, not market dominance.
Right.
To illustrate this, let's look at a visceral example from our sources. We have a piece from Joe Anderson, written for Catholic Rural Life.
Oh, this story's great.
It is. Joe is not a stereotypical farmer. He is the chief financial officer for the Diocese of Phoenix.
So definitely a day job.
Very much so. And he does not live on a 100-acre spread in the rural Midwest. He lives on a 1/3-acre residential lot in a massive, sweltering southwestern metropolis.
A third of an acre in Phoenix, Arizona. You cannot get much further from the romanticized agrarian ideal than a subdivided lot in the desert.
Exactly. But Anderson details how this philosophy actually takes root in reality. When they bought their house, they discovered the zoning laws included animal privileges.
Animal privileges in the city.
Yeah. Now, Joe's wife grew up on a real working farm in Iowa. She possessed a deep, unromanticized agricultural realism. She knew exactly how much work animals take.
She knew what she was getting into.
But Joe, riding this wave of agrarian enthusiasm, nervously came home one day and confessed that he had purchased 2 goats.
I try to picture that conversation like, honey, I've been running the diocesan spreadsheets all day, and by the way, we now own livestock. I am sure she was absolutely thrilled.
I'm sure it was an interesting dinner. It began as an experiment, perhaps even a slightly misguided one in her eyes initially. But those 2 goats fundamentally changed the ecology of their third of an acre and their relationship to it.
Because they need care.
The goats required daily care, which built routine. Then the goats led to chickens. Then came the planting of fruit trees and the establishment of year-round garden beds.
And mechanically, this creates a closed loop system, right?
Yeah.
The goat manure doesn't just sit there as waste.
Right, it has a purpose.
Combined with organic compost they source from their neighbors, it becomes the fertilizer for the soil in those garden beds, which in Phoenix probably needs all the help it can get.
That's exactly how it works. And what does this entire closed-loop system yield on a third of an acre? It doesn't yield a massive financial profit. He isn't quitting his job as CFO.
No.
But they have fresh eggs every single morning. They have fruit that his wife cans and preserves to last the entire year. They have constant rotating produce.
Yeah.
They have drastically lowered their dependence on the grocery store supply chain for their basic nutritional needs.
And there is a deeper layer here that Anderson points out in the text, which I think is the most crucial takeaway.
That's that.
It became a family work. They aren't just consumers living under the same roof, individually staring at screens. They are a productive unit.
Yes, a cohesive unit.
They have to coax life out of this tiny plot of land together. When the extreme Phoenix heat threatens the crops or pests attack the trees, they suffer those setbacks together. And when the harvest comes in, they rejoice together over the literal, tangible fruits of their labor.
It's a shared reality.
It seamlessly integrates a conventional, high-level professional career with a genuinely productive homestead.
It is the living proof that the hybrid model isn't just possible. It is profoundly enriching to the human experience. It anchors a family in reality.
But this naturally raises a massive question. We've established that a hybrid model is practical, whether you are on 20 acres or a third of an acre. But we need to dig into the why.
The philosophy behind it.
Right. Why is this specific type of ownership, like owning the actual means to produce some of your own sustenance, so vital? To understand the urgency behind the Catholic land movement, we have to look at the foundational texts of Catholic social teaching that inspired it.
Which takes us back to a massive global crisis in the late 19th century. We have to step into the world of 1891. And we should assume, for those listening, that you are broadly familiar with the catastrophic social upheaval of the Industrial Revolution. This is the era of rampant child labor, lethal working conditions, and the complete destruction of the artisan class.
It was a brutal time.
Pope Leo XIII authors a watershed encyclical called Rerum Novarum. He is looking out from the Vatican at a global society being ripped apart by two aggressively competing ideologies.
Right. And just to set some boundaries here for our listeners, our objective in this deep dive is not to endorse a specific political party.
No, not at all.
Nor are we trying to map these 19th century critiques perfectly onto modern left-wing versus right-wing cable news debates. We are impartially reporting the historical and theological framework that Leo XIII laid out because it is the bedrock of the entire movement we are discussing.
Exactly. And Leo XIII's critique was sweeping. On one side, he observed unbridled, laissez-faire capitalism.
Okay, let's define what he meant by that.
This was a system where wealth and the actual means of production, the factories, the land, the raw materials, were being rapidly concentrated into the hands of a microscopic elite.
A very small group of owners.
Right. This left the vast, overwhelming majority of the population dispossessed. They were stripped of property and turned into isolated, helpless wage earners, entirely dependent on factory owners for their daily bread, living in squalor.
Then on the other side, you had the rising tide of socialism, which looked at this horrific inequality and proposed what seemed like a logical remedy.
Which was?
Abolish private property altogether, strip the factory owners of their capital, hand it all over to the state, and let the state distribute the wealth evenly.
But Leo XIII looked at both of these systems and declared that both were fundamentally destructive to the dignity of the human person.
He didn't pull any punches.
He rejected the socialist remedy of state ownership as emphatically unjust. He argued that it robs the lawful possessor, it distorts the proper limited function of the state, and ultimately harms the very working class it claims to protect by removing their ability to better their own condition through ownership.
But in the very same breath, he vehemently condemned the greed, the exploitation, and the monopolistic practices of unchecked industrial capitalism.
He really went after both extremes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Leo XIII doesn't just make an economic argument. He makes a profound anthropological argument about human nature itself.
This is the core of it.
He argues that the right to private property is a fundamental distinction between humans and animals. I want to unpack the mechanics of this because it's brilliant.
Let's do it.
Animals, he notes, operate purely on instinct. Their primary drives are self-preservation and propagation. A wolf uses a den to sleep in today. A bird eats a seed it finds today. They use the material world momentarily in the present tense.
They cannot comprehend the future. They are bound by immediate necessity.
Exactly. But humans possess reason. We have the rational capacity to comprehend the future, to anticipate winter, to plan for a time when we will be old or sick and unable to hunt or forage.
We can see ahead.
And because we can plan for tomorrow, Leo argues that we have a natural right to possess things stably and permanently. We don't just need the right to eat the apple today. We need the right to own the soil, the tree, and the orchard so we can guarantee our family's survival 5 years from now.
That is the crux of it right there. The permanence of human foresight demands the permanence of property. And this leads directly to his next, perhaps most controversial point in the modern context.
Which is?
The family is a true society and is older than any state. It is antecedent to the state. Before there were kings or parliaments or republics, there was the family.
That's a powerful idea.
Therefore, a father's, and by extension, a parent's right to provide for their children through productive property is a sacred law of nature.
Let's define productive property here because that's the key adjective. We aren't just talking about owning a massive collection of consumer goods.
No, we are talking about property that generates sustenance or wealth. Land that grows food, a workshop with tools that builds furniture, a bakery oven, a printing press.
Means that produce.
Property that can be inherited, that can sustain a familial lineage across generations. Leo III is stating that the state does not grant you the right to own this kind of property. Nature grants it. God grants it. The state's only legitimate job in this regard is to safeguard that natural right, not to absorb it.
I was reading this section of the encyclical, and it is striking how radical it sounds today.
It really pushes against modern assumptions.
We have been so conditioned to view property merely as a mechanism for consumption. You buy a house to live in, you buy a TV to watch, you buy clothes to wear. We view property as things that depreciate.
Stuff to use up.
But Rerum Novarum views productive property as a fortress. It is the very foundation of a free and resilient family. If you own the means of your own survival, you cannot be easily coerced, starved out, or absorbed by a corporate monopoly on one side or an overreaching totalitarian state on the other. It is the ultimate bulwark of liberty.
Which is precisely why, when a society loses that widespread ownership, liberty evaporates. And this is where we must bring in the historical analysis of Hilaire Belloc.
Oh, Belloc is fascinating.
Because he mapped out exactly what happens when Leo III's sans warnings are ignored. Belloc wrote a seminal book called The Servile State, and his thesis is chilling. He argues that capitalism, and we need to use his strict definition here, which is a system where a tiny minority owns the means of production and the vast majority own nothing but their labor, which they must sell for a wage, is inherently unstable.
Wait, I want to clarify his definition really quickly. When Belloc says capitalism, he isn't just talking about free markets or the ability to buy and sell freely.
No, not at all.
He is specifically defining it as the concentration of capital into the hands of a few.
Exactly. A market where most people own their own shops and trade freely is not what Belloc calls capitalism. That's just a healthy market. Capitalism, to Belloc, requires a dispossessed proletariat.
A mass of people who own nothing.
And he looks back at history to prove this wasn't always the norm. He points to Western Europe before the Reformation. He notes that property was once widely, if imperfectly, distributed. Serfs had slowly gained secure, customary tenure on their land, transitioning into a free peasantry.
So they actually had rights to the land.
Craftsmen in the cities were organized into autonomous guilds that protected their ownership of tools and their share of the market. Families largely owned the means of their own livelihood.
So how did we lose that? Because Belloc points out that by the 19th century, 19/20ths of the English population were completely dispossessed of capital and land. What were the mechanics of that massive shift?
Belloc traces it heavily to the dissolution of the monasteries during the English Reformation.
Henry VIII.
Yes. This wasn't just a theological dispute. It was arguably the largest upward transfer of wealth and land in English history up to that point. The monasteries held massive amounts of land in trust, essentially acting as the social safety net, providing secure leases to thousands of peasant farmers. When the crown seized that land, they didn't keep it. They sold it off or gifted it to a small cadre of wealthy nobles and political allies.
So overnight, these peasants, who had generations of customary rights to farm that specific plot of land, suddenly found themselves dealing with new profit-driven landlords.
Yes, and those new landlords began the process of enclosure. They realized they could make more money raising sheep for the wool trade than by collecting small rents from peasant farmers.
So they kicked them off.
They literally fenced off the common lands, revoked the leases, and evicted the peasantry. This mass of newly homeless, landless people was pushed into the cities. They had no land, no tools, no means of survival.
Nothing.
The only thing they had left to sell was their physical labor. This, Belloc argues, is the true bloody birth of the industrial proletariat. They were forced to accept any wage under any horrific condition just to avoid starvation.
What's fascinating here is Belloc's terrifying prediction about where this inherent instability inevitably leads, because he didn't think society could sustain that level of chaotic, hyper-competitive, cutthroat capitalism forever. The tension is just too great.
It is. Human beings crave security above all else. A man will tolerate a lack of freedom long before he will tolerate the prospect of his children starving.
That's a grim reality.
So Belloc predicted that society would naturally, almost gravitationally, seek stability by returning to what he called a servile state.
A servile state. That's an incredibly bleak term. Break down exactly what that looks like in practice. How does a free society voluntarily become servile?
A servile state is a society where the non-owning masses, the proletariat, are either legally compelled or overwhelmingly economically forced to work for the owning class. But in exchange, the owning class, backed by the state, guarantees them basic security and a minimum livelihood.
So it's a trade-off.
Think of it as a grand bargain. You give up the aspiration of ownership, you give up your true economic independence, and you accept your permanent status as a wage earner. In return, the corporations and the government promise you minimum wage laws, unemployment insurance, and a basic social safety net so you won't literally starve in the streets. You trade your freedom for security.
It's the ultimate golden handcuff. If you don't own the land, the food, or the tools, you are entirely dependent on the wage provided by the owner. And Belloc didn't see state-run collectivism, like socialism, as the cure for this, did he?
Not at all. This is where Belloc is so prescient. He argued that collectivism is actually just working with the grain of the servile state. Socialism doesn't restore property to the family. It just swaps out a few corporate owners for a massive bureaucracy of state owners.
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
The individual family remains completely dispossessed. The worker is still just a cog in a massive centralized machine. They just have a different, supposedly more benevolent boss.
So, if unbridled capitalism leads to corporate wage slavery and socialism leads to state bureaucracy slavery, what is the third way? What were Belloc and Chesterton actually advocating for?
They proposed a much harder but much truer path, which they termed distributism.
Distributism.
The core idea is brilliantly simple, even if the execution is incredibly complex. A society is only truly free and only truly stable when the determinate mass of families actually owns capital and land. Widespread distributed ownership.
Let's clarify this because I know this gets misunderstood all the time. When people hear distributism and Catholic land movement, they immediately think, okay, they want to empty the cities and force everyone to become a dirt farmer.
Right, they picture everyone with a pitchfork.
But that is entirely false. Distributism encompasses Main Street just as much as it encompasses the farm, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The vision of a healthy distributed society includes family farms, yes, but it also fundamentally relies on craftsmen, independent shops, small manufacturers, tradespeople, and local professionals. It's about a family owning the usefulness of their specific trade.
It's the carpenter owning his own workshop, his own saws, his own client list, rather than just clocking in at a massive corporate furniture factory.
Exactly.
It's the baker owning her own ovens and storefront. It's the accountant owning his own practice. The goal isn't universal agriculture. The goal is widespread ownership of productive property to ensure families aren't at the mercy of distant economic shocks or massive supply chain failures.
And if we transition from Belloc's rigorous economic theory to the cultural ramifications of this, we have to look at his great friend and collaborator, G.K. Chesterton.
Ah, Chesterton.
Chesterton was uniquely interested in how this dynamic played out culturally, and he looked specifically at the American landscape. He wrote a brilliant essay in 1921 called The March to Main Street.
Yes, this is a phenomenal piece. Chesterton takes a tour of the American Middle West and he observes something profound. He looks at these American farmers and realizes they are essentially acting as a free peasantry.
In an economic sense.
Economically, they were living the distributist dream. They had real economic equality among themselves. They owned their land outright. They weren't serfs. They weren't being taxed into oblivion by feudal lords or corporate monopolies. When they gathered in their local towns, they consulted each other as equal citizens on a completely common basis.
But Chesterton, being Chesterton, wasn't just there to offer blind praise. He offered a very sharp, very challenging critique. He saw that while these American farmers possessed genuine economic freedom, they completely lacked spiritual and cultural independence.
Unpack that. What does he mean by cultural independence? Because they were going to local churches, they had town halls. How were they culturally dependent?
He compared them to the historic peasant classes of Europe. European peasants, for all their economic hardships, didn't just grow their own physical food. They grew their own culture from the ground up.
Organic culture.
They created their own distinct songs, their own architectural styles, their own localized festivals. Chesterton specifically points to the Oberammergau Passion Play in Bavaria.
Right. The play where the entire village comes together every 10 years to perform the Passion of Christ. And the villagers themselves are the actors, the set designers, the directors. It's a massive, elaborate cultural production that is entirely internally generated.
Precisely. It is culture as creation.
Mm.
The American farmers in the Middle West, on the other hand, Chesterton observed, were entirely importing their culture from the decaying urban centers via the railroads.
They were just consumers.
They weren't creating plays. They were consuming the cinema. They weren't writing local music. They were buying whatever sheet music or phonographs were shipped out from New York or Chicago.
I can hear someone listening to this right now, maybe commuting in their car, and they're saying, okay, is it really so bad to watch a movie instead of spending 6 months putting on a village play?
It sounds like a lot of work.
Aren't we just talking about entertainment? Why does this matter to the survival of a family? And the way I think about it is, to go back to the food analogy, it reminds me of the difference between eating out at a chain restaurant every single night versus cooking a meal from scratch at home.
That's a great way to frame it.
When you eat at the restaurant, you are engaging in pure consumption. You have no idea where the ingredients came from. You have no say in the recipe. You just pay and consume. When you cook at home, you are engaged in creation. When you outsource your culture to a distant, centralized hub, you outsource the formation of your children's imagination. You let someone else write the narrative of what is good, true, and beautiful.
That is a vital point. And Chesterton goes even further in his critique of this imported culture. He notes that the industrial culture is spreading not because it is vital or full of life, but precisely because it is decaying. It operates like a fog, choking natural things with dust and ashes. He uses this incredibly evocative phrase, saying that the culture coming along the railroads from the urban centers brings a reek of rotting things.
Wow. A reek of rotting things. That is a devastating critique of mass media.
It is strong language, but his underlying point is essential for the Catholic land movement today. True resilience is not just a pantry full of canned beans and a paid-off mortgage. True resilience requires a community to have the capacity to produce its own spiritual and cultural food, not just its material food.
Me both.
If you own 100 acres of land and you are completely debt-free, but your mind and your family's imagination are entirely colonized by the mass media of a distant metropolis, you aren't truly free. You are just a well-fed serf on a very large estate.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have Leo XIII laying the theological groundwork of property, Belloc explaining the economic mechanics of the servile state, and Chesterton warning us about cultural colonization. This is a beautiful, challenging, and somewhat intimidating philosophy that they hammered out in smoky pubs in the early 20th century.
It's very lofty.
But there was another key figure in those early distributist meetings, Fr. Vincent McNabb, a Dominican friar. And he famously used to bang his fists on the table during these theoretical debates and shout, "We mustn't just argue in principle, what we must be proving in fact."
It is the necessary challenge to any intellectual movement. Theory is easy. Writing essays about agrarianism is easy. Reality, like actually planting a seed, actually managing livestock, actually building an alternative economy, is incredibly hard.
It's messy.
So the question we must ask is, how are people actually living this today? How are they proving it in fact?
And to answer that, we look at the contemporary Catholic land movement. We have fantastic insights from an interview with Andrew Uhl and Mike Thomas. These guys are not just theorists, they are practitioners.
They're doing the work.
They manage 57 active chapters of the Catholic land movement worldwide. They are out there proving it, in fact. And the facts they share are really beautiful. Let's look at a specific story they highlight from Catholic rural life regarding Mary Ellen Corey and the Corey family farm in Iowa.
This is a perfect case study. The Corey farm is not a new experimental homestead. It has been operating since the mid-1800s.
So it's deeply rooted.
The really compelling part of the narrative, the part that speaks to the deeper renewal we are talking about, started around 2019.
Right. Her son became deeply interested in organic farming methods. They made a collective family decision to transition a significant portion of their acreage away from the conventional, chemical-heavy industrial methods they had been using and return to natural organic certification.
And anyone who knows farming knows that organic certification is not a casual process.
It takes years.
It requires years of intentional soil rehabilitation. It is a literal return to the natural roots of the earth, prioritizing the complex biology of the soil over synthetic chemical inputs.
Hey.
But what is so striking about this story is the parallel journey that was happening in their spiritual lives at the exact same time.
Yes, the Corey family were devout Protestants. But as the son was researching organic farming up in Minnesota, he met a devout Catholic woman. This sparked a theological curiosity. He started reading the early church fathers, he joined RCIA, and eventually this initiated a domino effect.
It spread through the whole family.
The entire family, including Mary Ellen and her husband, embarked on this deep theological study and eventually converted to Catholicism, entering the church together at the Easter Vigil in 2022.
It is a profound, almost poetic symmetry. As they were returning to the historical roots of the Christian faith, like stripping away centuries of later additions to find the original foundation, they were simultaneously returning to the natural roots of the soil.
It's incredible how those line up.
Mary Ellen talks about this beautifully. She notes how experiencing this tangible biological fruitfulness on an agricultural level radically deepened her gratitude on a spiritual level. She understands the mechanics. She has to select the right seed. She has to repair the tractor. She has to monitor the weather.
It's hard work.
But ultimately, she recognizes that she relies entirely on God to give the actual increase. The mystery of a seed germinating is just beyond human engineering.
It sounds incredibly peaceful and harmonious when you summarize it like that, but we have to be very careful here. We cannot paint this movement with a romantic, pastoral brush. Returning to the land, or even just keeping a heavy, productive garden and a few livestock on a suburban lot, is not an idyllic, stress-free retreat.
Not at all.
It is gritty, it is exhausting, things die, weather destroys months of work.
And the leaders of the movement emphasize that this grit is exactly the mechanism that builds human resilience. In the interview with Yule and Thomas, the interviewer shares a very raw, very real story that shatters any romantic illusion.
Oh, the generator story.
A massive ice storm is bearing down on his homestead. The temperatures are plunging rapidly, the freezing rain is starting, and his generator, the single piece of technology keeping his family warm and his livestock's water from freezing, breaks down.
Right. He paints this vivid, miserable picture. He talks about spending 5 exhausting hours in the freezing dark. He's digging frantically through his disorganized shop for a specific socket wrench he just can't find.
And he's lugging 50-pound bags of feed
Through the mud at 9 p.m. He's freezing, his hands are numb. He finally manages to replace the fuel line on the generator, pulls the cord, and it still won't start. He eventually has to give up. He goes to bed feeling utterly defeated, physically exhausted, and he admits he was thinking, there is absolutely nothing contemplative, nothing spiritual, and nothing beautiful about what I just did. I am just tired, angry, and frustrated.
This raises an important question, and it's the question at the heart of this entire lifestyle. How is this exhausting, frustrating drudgery actually spiritual?
Right, because it doesn't feel spiritual in the moment.
Because the leaders of the Catholic land movement point out that it absolutely fundamentally is.
Yeah.
And to explain why, they reference St. Thomas Aquinas, who famously taught that grace perfects nature.
Meaning what, exactly? In the context of a guy failing to fix a broken generator in an ice storm, how does grace perfect a broken fuel line?
Well, it doesn't perfect the fuel line. It perfects the man. Aquinas means that the natural human virtues, fortitude, temperance, prudence, justice, have to be built first. They are the scaffolding.
You need a foundation.
You cannot build the roof of spiritual grace if the foundational walls of natural virtue aren't there. By wrestling with that failure in the freezing cold, by practicing sheer fortitude, by sacrificing his own physical comfort to try and ensure his family had power and his animals had water, that father was cultivating deep, robust, natural virtue.
That makes sense.
He wasn't meditating peacefully in a quiet, incense-filled chapel, but he was enacting sacrificial love through sheer perseverance against reality.
And there was a hidden victory in that story, too, which he only realized in hindsight. He noted that he didn't spend those 2 hours in the freezing shop alone. He spent them working side by side with his 11-year-old son.
They were in it together.
They were wrestling with a difficult, unforgiving reality together. They were troubleshooting, failing, and trying again, instead of sitting comfortably inside, staring at separate screens. The son was watching his father model perseverance.
Which brings up a phrase from that exact interview that I think is just brilliant. One of them says, "A chore chart is a catechism."
I love that phrase so much. A chore chart is a cat. If you forget to secure the latch on the chicken coop, the fox gets the hens, and there is blood and feathers in the morning. It roots a person entirely in the cause and effect of the real material world, which is a powerful antidote to the virtual, consequence-free environments we spend so much time in online.
And that grounding in reality fundamentally changes how you experience gratitude. The interviewer in that piece talked about a simple meal of zucchini pasta. Now, they planted the squash seeds months ago. They spent weeks weeding the bed in the hot sun. The kids hauled water to it every single night.
So much work for one meal.
They harvested it, they prepared it. When that food finally sits on your plate and you bow your head to say grace, the words, "Bless us, O Lord," and "These thy gifts" take on a radically different, intensely physical meaning compared to saying grace over a plastic-wrapped, microwavable vegetable you bought at a big box store. You know the history of the food. You know the sweat that went into it.
It connects you to the earth. And as you noted in your notes, it deeply mirrors the sacramental life of the church itself.
It does. Christ could have chosen absolutely anything to be the center of the sacramental life of the church. He could have chosen a specific chant, or a mental meditation, or a complex ritual washing, but he chose a meal.
Bread and wine.
Literally, as the liturgy says, the fruits of the earth and the work of human hands. When you commune with the land by working it, when you crush the wheat and press the grapes, and then it physically nourishes you, you are participating in the profound physical reality that underpins the entire sacramental worldview. Matter matters.
So we're building virtue, we're building resilience in our families, we are connecting with reality, but a household, no matter how productive, cannot survive in total isolation. You need neighbors, you need a community. But how do we actually build community today? Because I think the modern instinct, especially among people who get excited about this movement, is to just tart by it.
Yes, the consumer's fantasy of community. It is a very common trap. The thought process is, well, if I can just earn enough money at my tech job, I can buy a massive 500-acre plot of land in Idaho, carve it up into smaller parcels, sell them exclusively to my hand-picked friends who agree with me theologically and politically, and we will build a manufactured, frictionless utopia.
And the leaders of the Catholic land movement flat out reject that approach. They say it almost always fails. You cannot buy community. Modernity has tricked us into thinking a community is just an internet interest group.
We want echo chambers.
We think a community is a group of people who share our exact hobbies, our exact political takes, and our exact aesthetics. And if anyone disagrees, we just block them or leave the forum.
But true community, historical community, is geographic and material. It isn't based on perfect ideological alignment. It is based on shared dependency. It means sharing the same aquifer. It means dealing with the same local zoning board. It means sharing the burdens of the physical landscape.
You're stuck with each other.
Community is forged slowly, over years, through mutual work, through helping each other in a crisis, and frankly, through the difficult, unglamorous work of mutual forgiveness when your neighbor's cows break through the fence and eat your garden.
The stories they shared about this in the interview were so visceral and real. There was one guy who talks about being out of town for work. His wife is at home, 9 months pregnant, and one of their goats manages to get the wire handle of a bucket lodged hopelessly in its mouth.
Oh, it sounds awful.
The goat is panicking, screaming in pain, and the heavily pregnant wife physically cannot wrestle this animal to the ground to help it. So the husband, from states away, calls a buddy from his local parish. Within 5 minutes, the friend drops what he is doing, rushes over, wrestles the goat to the ground, and dislodges the bucket handle.
Or they shared another story of a wife accidentally hitting a deer with her car on a country road. A neighbor sees it happen, and instead of just asking if she's okay and driving off, he goes home, gets his knives, comes back, and spends hours field dressing and processing the meat right there so it doesn't go to waste, and gives the meat to the family.
That is community.
That is community. It's built on shared temporal dependencies. It's built on knowing with absolute certainty that if your roof blows off in a storm, or your well pump breaks in the dead of winter, or you fall severely ill, the people physically closest to you, regardless of whether they agree with all your opinions, will show up and carry you through.
And this emphasis on the local, on the immediate neighbor, naturally brings us to one of the most foundational principles of Catholic social teaching, which is subsidiarity.
Exactly. Pope Pius XI articulated this principle most clearly in his 1931 encyclical Quadragesimo Anno. He was looking at the increasing centralization of power in both fascist and communist regimes, and he defined the principle of subsidiary function.
What does that mean?
He stated that it is an injustice, a grave evil, and a disturbance of right order to assign to a greater, higher, or larger organization what a smaller, subordinate, and more local group can accomplish.
Let's break that down into practical terms. It means the federal government shouldn't intervene to do what the state can handle. The state shouldn't do what the local town council can handle. The town council shouldn't do what the local parish or neighborhood association can do.
And it keeps going down.
And most importantly, the parish should never usurp what the individual family can do.
The higher authority exists only to support, to provide subsidy to, the lower authority when it is overwhelmed, never to absorb it or destroy its agency. The goal is always to push action, responsibility, and ownership down to the lowest, most local, most human scale level possible.
And Catholic rural life offers a highly practical, modern example of this principle of subsidiarity in action through what they call congregation-supported agriculture. This is a brilliant model.
It's very clever.
Instead of a parish family relying entirely on a massive, multinational corporate supply chain to feed themselves, a chain where produce is picked unripe in another hemisphere and shipped thousands of miles, the parish itself acts as a local food broker. They host a community-supported agriculture, or CSA, model right on the church grounds.
Mechanically, here's how a CSA works. City or suburban residents in the parish buy a share of a local farmer's produce prior to the planting season, usually in late winter. They pay up front. Then, as the harvest comes in throughout the summer and fall, the members receive a weekly box of fresh, seasonal food.
It is the ultimate win-win scenario, built entirely on local relationships. The farmer gets economic certainty and working capital up front, which is a massive relief in agriculture where you usually take all the risk and don't get paid until the end of the year.
Right, it smooths out their income.
The parishioner gets incredibly fresh, highly nutritious food, and the deep security of knowing exactly where it came from and how it was raised. And the church parking lot, which is usually empty 6 days a week, transforms on a Wednesday afternoon into a literal hub of local economic exchange and resilience. That is subsidiarity in action.
Yeah.
You bypass the massive conglomerate and deal directly with your neighbor.
And this local resilience matters on a macro scale right now more than it ever has. We have to look at the global systems we currently rely on, and we have to understand the inherent catastrophic danger of pure, unbridled efficiency.
So what does this all mean? Why can't we just trust the highly efficient industrial systems? Why go through the effort of a CSA or growing a garden when the supermarket is so convenient? Well, during the interview, the CLM leaders bring up the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. If you've ever watched the Ken Burns documentary on the Dust Bowl, it is horrifying.
It's devastating to watch.
Industrial agriculture in the 1910s and 20s created incredible fossil fuel-powered machinery that was wildly, unprecedentedly efficient at churning up the deep-rooted prairie grasses of the Great Plains. It was a system driven entirely by unbridled profit and maximum extraction. They didn't practice crop rotation, they didn't plant windbreaks, they just plowed millions of acres and planted wheat relentlessly because the price was high.
And the result was an ecological catastrophe of biblical proportions. When you prioritize pure mathematical efficiency and short-term extraction over long-term stewardship, you eventually destroy the very foundation of life. The soil lost its structure, turned to fine dust, and blew across the continent in black blizzards that literally blocked out the sun in Washington, D.C.
It is the ultimate historical lesson. Highly efficient systems are almost always highly concentrated systems. They lack redundancy. And highly concentrated systems are incredibly fragile. We've all seen this recently in our own lives. A supply chain shock, a ship getting stuck in a canal, a geopolitical war breaking out, a global pandemic, a sudden spike in energy costs.
That doesn't take much.
When the system is highly concentrated, a single point of failure can completely empty the grocery store shelves in a matter of days. We realize that the efficiency of just-in-time delivery actually just means zero margin for error.
By stark contrast, consider the data from the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO of the United Nations. This isn't just Catholic agrarian theory, this is global agricultural data.
What do they say?
The FAO explicitly states that family farming is at the absolute heart of global climate resilience and food security. Small and medium-scale farms, by their very nature, boast much higher levels of crop diversity. They nurture the soil because they intend to pass it on to their children. They safeguard genetic biodiversity. They keep traditional, localized ecological knowledge alive.
So they are naturally more stable.
A landscape of 10,000 small, diverse farms is inherently more resilient to a shock than a landscape of 10 massive monocrop corporate farms, because the small farms are decentralized and diverse.
Okay, I hear all of this. The theology makes sense, the history makes sense, the data on resilience makes sense. But part of me wants to push back heavily here. Aren't we fighting a completely losing battle against modern technology?
Why do you see that?
Think about it. The automobile is what built suburbia, which physically isolated us from our neighbors and destroyed local main streets. Smartphones and the internet promise total global connection, but all the sociological data shows they have made us more anxious, distant, and lonely than at any point in human history. Isn't modern technology the fundamental enemy of this distributist, locally rooted vision? Aren't they mutually exclusive?
It's a paradox, truly, and it's one of the most exciting aspects of this conversation today. It is very easy to view technology as the enemy of localism. But while the original Industrial Revolution in the 19th century absolutely required massive factories, centralized capital, and concentrated labor, literally physically pushing people off the land and into crowded cities.
Right.
Modern technology could actually make Chesterton and Belloc's dream more possible today than it was in 1920. Technology does not have to centralize power.
That's a fascinating pivot. You are arguing that the nature of technology has shifted from centralizing to decentralizing. How exactly does tech decentralize the economy?
Think about the practical tools available right now, today, to an ordinary family. First, look at information and connectivity. High-speed rural internet allows professionals to earn a substantial living working remotely from a homestead. You no longer have to live in a microscopic apartment in the center of a hyper-expensive city to be a software engineer, an accountant, a graphic designer, or a consultant.
You can work from anywhere.
You can draw a professional salary while living on 10 acres, managing an orchard and raising children in the fresh air.
That is a massive shift. The link between where you earn your money and where you physically reside has been severed for millions of people.
Exactly. Then look at energy. A century ago, you had to be tied to a centralized municipal coal plant for electricity. Today, solar power, advanced battery storage, and microhydro allow for independent, decentralized energy production at the individual household level. You can own the means of your own energy production.
Oh, that's true. But what about physical production? Sure, we can move information around, but we still need physical stuff. Doesn't that still require massive factories?
Not anymore, and this is where it gets incredibly exciting. Look at the rise of small CNC machines, computer numerical control routers. Look at high-quality 3D printing. Look at small-scale robotics and automation.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
A century ago, to manufacture a high-precision metal or wood part, you needed a massive factory floor with millions of dollars of heavy machinery. Today, you can buy a CNC machine for the price of a used car, put it in your garage, download a design file from an architect in Italy, and carve that exact precision piece right on your own workbench.
So we're literally talking about the return of the workshop to the household economy. A family can design and manufacture physical, highly specialized goods on a small scale, completely bypassing the massive industrial manufacturer.
Yes. And then finally, you combine that with online commerce platforms. This gives small, local producers inexpensive, direct access to worldwide markets. You can sell your handcrafted CNC furniture, or your wife's specialized herbal tinctures, or your farm's artisanal cheese directly to a consumer halfway across the world without needing a massive corporate distributor or a multi-million-dollar marketing budget.
We can use the highest tech tools of the 21st century to build low-tech, highly resilient, deeply rooted, beautifully human lives. We are blending the absolute cutting edge of the digital age with the ancient, enduring reality of the dirt.
It completely flips the narrative. Technology used intentionally can be the very mechanism that frees the family from the servile state.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today, from the USDA spreadsheets to 16th century English monasteries to 3D printers. Let's synthesize this vision for the listener. The return to the land today, the modern expression of the Catholic land movement and distributism, is not about a mass panicked exodus where everyone drops their laptops, buys a scythe, and tries to become an Amish farmer.
Not at all.
It is about building a hybrid household economy. It's families intentionally blending professional, modern work with backyard gardens, a few chickens, small-scale manufacturing in the garage, local economic exchange with their neighbors, and deep, visceral community ties. It's about moving the needle of your life, even just a few degrees, to become less fragile. It's about ensuring that your family's survival isn't entirely dependent on systems you cannot see, influence, or control.
And as we wrap up, we want to leave you, the listener, with this final thought to mull over. We have been told for over a century that progress means moving away from the soil. We've been told that success is measured by how much we can outsourcing our food production, our energy, our children's education, and our culture to massive, distant corporations.
The ultimate convenience.
But in a world that is currently suffering from profound digital fatigue, deep economic instability, and heartbreaking social isolation, what if the ultimate act of rebellion
And the ultimate act of hope.
is simply to walk out your back door, plant a single seed in the dirt, and reclaim the material foundation of your own life?
Thank you for joining us in the Common Room for this deep dive. Step outside today, take a walk around your neighborhood, see what's growing, see what you can build. Until next time.